Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Building a Wellbeing Economy from Grassroots to Global Change. My name is Sean O'Shea, and I work as Government Relations and Campaign Specialist at Ecojustice. I join you today from the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, Chippewas, William Treaties First Nations, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat First Nations. Today's webinar couldn't be more timely and pertinent. Global tensions, war, and strife threaten to push our societies and our communities to the brink. Global elites have built our economy to depend on intense resource extraction, and when the supply of resources are disrupted, the most vulnerable in our society are the first to suffer. In Canada, austerity and deregulatory measures pursued by both federal and provincial governments are taking a toll on our lives and on the lives of our families and friends. We are witnessing governments divert resources away from programs that can address current affordability crisis and growing inequities, and from programs that can create long-term sustainable jobs. Instead, governments are using taxpayer money to invest in more resource extraction and militarization that benefits the wealthy minority at the expense of already impacted communities, while further exacerbating the boom and bust economic cycle. And all of this has a direct and lasting consequence on the health of the people and on the environment. We are already in an interlocking planetary crisis. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we consume, and our climate are directly impacted by poor economic choices. But there is another way. Today, our panelists will discuss how governments and decision makers can shift their economic models to systems that put the health and well-being of the planet and its people first. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded, but only speakers will be visible. A link to the recording and any resources shared in the chat will be sent to you via email after the event. Also, please note that the chat will be turned off during the webinar. If you have any questions you would like to ask or run into a tech issue, please use the Q&A function. We'll do our best to answer your questions during the session. If we run out of time, we'll follow up with answers afterwards. Today, we're joined by my colleague, Melissa Gorrie, Law Reform Manager at Ecojustice. Melissa joined Ecojustice in 2010. Her litigation work at Ecojustice has included successfully securing legal protections for species at risk and representing environmental groups and Indigenous nations opposing the harmful impacts of oil and gas development in so-called Alberta. Melissa currently oversees Ecojustice law reform efforts to advocate for transformative shifts in law to support a just and sustainable society. Melissa has volunteered with numerous environmental and social justice organizations, including co-founding Waste Free Edmonton. She also holds a Master of Law degree focused on how to transform state-based law to centre Indigenous sovereignty and advance environmental and social justice. We are also joined today by Michael Weatherhead. Michael is one of the co-founders of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. In his role as development lead for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, he leads the relationships with new and existing supporters of the Alliance and supports the organization's focus on redefining the role of business and finance in a well-being economy. An economist by training, Michael first worked in agricultural trade economics in both the Caribbean and in Oxford before managing and then becoming international director for the consulting arm of the New Economics Foundation for over a decade. Previously based in London, South Africa, and Spain, he is now based in Scotland. Also joining us is Kevin Sutton. Kevin Sutton is a writer, spoken word performance artist, workshop facilitator, communications professional, and community organizer. Their work with at-risk youth has led them to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work, helping organizations nurture supportive professional environments where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Kevin is also a partner in Second Wind Liberation and is currently serving as a core team member and steward of the Wellbeing Economic Alliance of Canada. And without further ado, I will pass you over to Melissa.
Thank you so much, Sean. And hello all. I will just add to the bio that Sean provided that I'm also a fourth generation settler of primarily Ukrainian descent, and I grew up in Treaty 8 territory in the Peace region, and I currently live in Treaty 6 territory in Amiskitchewa-Muskegon, or Beaver Hills House in Nahiawewana Cree, which is colonially known as Edmonton. And I'm very excited to speak with you both, with all of you today on this topic. I'm very passionate about it, and I'm really grateful to get to do the work that I do with Ecojustice in this area. So this will be just the one presentation that will happen during this webinar. Just wanting to give folks a bit of an overview of kind of why we're here talking about well-being economies. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So to talk a little bit more and ground, Sean did a great job of situating where we are politically, socially, economically, environmentally these days, but to ground a little bit more as to why we really need to be thinking about transforming our economic model toward well-being economies. So our current model is very much based on a linear focus that it prioritizes resource extraction, growth, overconsumption, and corporate profits. So it's very much that linear take, make, waste model. And we're seeing, throughout the life cycle from extraction all the way to ultimate waste disposal, a series of harms disproportionately impacting racialized and marginalized peoples and frontline communities and workers. We're also seeing the fact that all of this extraction and waste is very tied into the triple, what they're calling the triple planetary crisis. So loss of biodiversity, climate change, pollution, and toxic loads primarily in impacted communities and impacting other species as well. Oh, sorry. We're also seeing, growing levels of inequality, and so the bottom line is that we're not delivering well-being for people or planet. We're seeing the 1% getting richer, while the average person is struggling to get by as we see, the impending climate crises that we're actually living currently. And at the heart of this linear economic model is really the drive for perpetual growth with GDP or gross domestic product being the key measure used. And so GDP and growth has really been elevated to a place of prominence in our society. It's really become, synonymous with prosperity, a good life, a good quality of life. And, everyone has heard politicians speak about, where are we at with the economy? This is going to be good for the economy. We have a strong economy, and really a good government is a government that's increasing GDP. But the reality is that this isn't an accurate marker of prosperity and well-being. Even the person who created GDP back, this was post-World War II to stimulate growth after the war, really they warned about the limitations of this as a metric and that it doesn't measure general societal welfare or well-being. It's really just a measure of the monetary value of goods and services that we're producing in an economy. So just because we're producing a lot of stuff doesn't mean we are thriving with a good standard of living in a healthy environment. To the contrary, many harmful things actually count towards increasing GDP and are good for the economy. So, things like getting into traffic accidents, cutting down trees, polluting the water, and even war increases GDP. It also doesn't take into account many of the good things that actually matter to us, like community connection, safety, equality, healthy environments. It also minimizes, care work and housework that's primarily done by women. It's not counted. It also doesn't tell you anything about how equitable the distribution of benefits and harms are either. And so we have this endless extraction and growth that doesn't recognize the limits of the natural world. And we've heard before, probably you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. So we're seeing, ecological destruction, violation of rights, human rights, indigenous rights, health impacts, growing inequity. And so we really have to be asking, why do we need to continually justify investing in things like environmental protection, healthcare, affordable housing on the basis that it's good for the economy? Shouldn't it be enough that it helps people and planet thrive? I really feel that something is wrong if we're always needing to have an economic rationale to act or invest in something. What it really means is that we're acting in the service of the economy instead of the other way around. And that's really why I got into focusing on this so much and why I care so much about this issue is that I spent years working in trying to, protect the environment, support communities as a litigator and now law reform and seeing limited progress because the economy and corporate profits seem to take precedence so often. For example, my work in the tar sands or oil sands, we would go to these review processes and we would talk about the human health impacts, the ecological impacts, support Indigenous communities, and highlighting their concerns. And inevitably, even though there was so much evidence of the harms that would be caused by these projects, they would always be approved on the basis that they would be good for the economy and make profits for these companies. And so doing this work made me really realize that we needed to look at reforming the objectives. Otherwise, we were going to keep having these poor decision-making processes that deprioritize ecological and human health. We would be doing harm minimization and band-aid fixes without stopping this one of the key sources of the bleeding or harm, which is, this growth dependent model. So really needing to, new objectives to guide our economy and decision making. So, that was a little bit of doom and gloom, but you got to have that when these days it's part of the reality we live in. But the good news is that there are alternatives. That we really do control and can redesign the economy. The economy is a human invention. I know it can seem to folks like a bit of a mysterious black box. Only economists can understand it. We don't have any control over it. It just is. It just exists out there. But the reality is that it is something that we can redesign. And it's really something that's just supposed to be about how we provide and care for each other. So why don't we think about how we can redesign our economy so that we are actually providing and caring for each other and the environment? Surely we all want to live in a healthy community where everyone has access to good jobs, feels connected, and feels safe. So let's enter well-being economies. I put up here in terms of, the first thing I say is pluralistic. So everything I say, take with a grain of salt in terms of there's no one way to think about or measure or implement well-being economies. It is really something that needs to be very pluralistic. Different societies, different peoples will have different perspectives, and there's different things like collective versus individual well-being. But I'd say that's something to always keep in mind when we talk about this approach. Some of the other key principles, though, that I would offer here is things like prioritizing people and planet over profit, embedding within the laws of the and limits of the natural world, ensuring that we have relationships of reciprocity and regeneration. So we're giving back to the earth to the extent we're taking from it, not going to just continually extract and degrade, but regenerate. Center Indigenous peoples and Indigenous economies. And that's something, I've talked about our economic model and the growth-centered approach, but we always need to think about, when we talk about the economy, it's very intertwined with the colonial reality that we live in. They very much act and exist together. And so we can't think about redesigning our economies and advancing well-being without thinking about how we deconstruct the colonial and racist foundations of our society. We can't have a just and sustainable economy without addressing the exploitation of people and planet that is foundational to the systems. Related to that, we also can't ensure justice and equity without addressing things like white colonialism, sexism, and all these other foundational pieces. So in order to get to these reparations and healing for Indigenous people and people of color, we need to think about things like, wealth redistribution, land back, and there's various ways that that can be done. In justice and equity framing, we also need to think about things like intergenerational equity and interspecies equity. So, we talk about things like the rights of nature and the rights of other species as well. And not only do we want to be like doing better at redistributing what harms we've created, but we also want to make it distributive by design moving forward. So not just trickle down economics where okay, we'll give you some, which doesn't even actually work in practice. We're designing it so that the harms and benefits are distributed evenly from the start. And then finally, this last one is about process. It's really about ensuring that everyone's voices is heard, and we're centering those that have been most impacted under the current extractive economy. So there's things like citizens' assemblies that have been done in different countries, a participatory budgeting process in Brazil, indigenous peoples and in their economies have models of more consensus, collaborative-based decision making that is a really good example of alternatives. So just to say here, this is offering, only one view, but an alternative vision where we're thinking about it as circular, regenerative, pluralistic economies that ensure the health and well-being of all, including current and future generations, in an inclusive, equitable, and just manner within ecological limits. So it might sound like a lot, but you can break that down. You go from having a vision to having objectives or goals or priorities that help guide decision making moving forward. And along with that, you can have specific metrics or indicators that allow you to kind of measure how you're doing in meeting those overarching objectives. So some metrics that have, we see consistently in different examples in different jurisdictions are things like health, education, income and job security, the environment, food and housing security, culture and spirituality, civic engagement and democracy, justice and equity, safety and governance. And on the governance piece, I just want to highlight the importance again of that pluralistic approach and centering Indigenous peoples, their rights, their self-governance, and their sovereignty and how we build out any well-being economies models and design any of these systems and then supporting Indigenous economies in the process. Also, just to flag that we need to think about not just individual but collective well-being. And I think this list also demonstrates the fact that this type of reform isn't just for, departments that focus on economics or finance or business. It engages all departments and all mandates. It's a holistic approach that's needed. So with the time I have left, I just wanted to do a couple of slides of examples. I know my colleagues here that I'm so grateful gave of their time to be here today. We'll talk about some other examples, but because I have some slides, I can show visuals, and this is helpful, I think, to see some of these models that have been developed. So some of you may have heard of Kate Raworth and her book, The Donut Economy Model. It's pretty well known in many circles these days. We can see her here that she actually is an economist by trade and wrote the book I really appreciated because it broke down some of the assumptions based into the current system and some of the reasons why I was confused by a current economy. She helped me understand that it wasn't that I just couldn't get it, but there are a lot of problems with the current model and a lot of foundational myths and assumptions, like not taking impacts to the environment into account when doing these economic models. So you can see here in the center is the light green is the donut. It's kind of the safe operating space for humanity. At the dark outer edge is the ecological ceiling. So the 9 planetary boundaries that Western scientists have identified, we don't want to exceed or we'll have ecological overshoot. And then in the inner dark circle, we have the social foundation. So the places where things like housing, food, clean water, equity, you don't want to be having a social shortfall. You want to be staying in that little nice donut. And so it's a way of re-envisioning how we're designing our economy to live within that safe space. And this model has been incorporated in various municipalities. I'll give the Nanaimo example because it's, somewhat local in so-called Canada. And they do have a city plan, and decision makers are supposed to include this as a lens that they apply in making decisions and in budgeting. And the part that I really like is they recently put out the Nanaimo monitoring bar, which I think is quite clever. I'm sure most folks here would know if you're from so-called Canada, the delicious Nanaimo bars that they are famous for. So they basically cut the donut, rolled it out, and are tracking in real time. They have an online dashboard where they take the different indicators for social and environmental pieces, and they're able to see how much overshoot or shortfall they're having on these different indicators that they've developed for the city, which I think is pretty neat. Going through these very briefly, but just so you have those visuals to guide the rest of the conversation. New Zealand's Living Standards Framework and the Maori He Ara Weora is another thing I wanted to tag here. You can see the indicators or metrics they've developed in this living standards framework, but also I really wanted to highlight this because of the pluralistic approach that's taken, that there's the well-being framework of the Maori that is included. And it's interesting to see too, what they have here is, so Weora is, essentially water is life. So how foundational water is to everything, our well-being. In the center, Werua is the spiritual world. And so really talking about the pluralistic approach of, in the worldview of the Maori, the spiritual is the core, the center to be built out from. Then Te Ao is the natural world. And then from there, Iratangata is, the human world. So very instructive and interesting. And so the idea is that these are both supposed to guide decision making moving forward. There was also a well-being budget that there was some real promise around, but New Zealand's honestly not doing as great these days, but it's a great framework to look at. Not doing so well these days, I mean in terms of advancing the well-being budget. I also wanted to flag Wales Wellbeing of Future Generations Act because it's one of our guiding examples. It's a law. It mandates well-being objectives and that government officials have to actually demonstrate how their decision making and budgeting aligns with these broader objectives. They also have a commissioner for future generations, which helps provide some of that advice and expertise and oversight and coordinating function to help ensure that the government departments are actually moving forward and advancing well-being as a key determinant in their decision making and their policies that they create. I also wanted to flag that Canada does have a quality of life framework and actually a relatively recently appointed cabinet committee on well-being and quality of life. Unfortunately, the two have not really been speaking to each other, is my understanding. The folks in Stats Canada are responsible for this, and it's a really good starting point. There's a lot of metrics and indicators that have been developed. We do see it somewhat in the budgeting that comes out, the federal budget. If you look at an appendices, I can talk later on about how deficient it is, but all to say we have a starting place. Canada could be a leader in this regard. And my final comment will just be, all of the examples that I gave were of governance frameworks, state-based approaches. As my colleagues will speak to, there's so many other examples out there, community-led, there's business approaches. But just that one of the good things about this work, and because I'm a lawyer, I come at this from a legal legislative policy lens. But one of the good things about this is it helps enable and even sometimes can, require that better policies, better initiatives that actually advance well-being are put forward. And so when you redefine what the objectives are, it's easier for some of these examples like indigenous renewable projects or circular solutions to be advanced, to get funding through budgets instead of finding there's roadblocks and you constantly are trying to beg for funding or getting your funding cut or you don't have supports. You have these frameworks that then require governments to center these kinds of initiatives and these policies and properly fund them so that they can flourish. And so I just want to make that clear that that is kind of a connecting piece, but you also need to be thinking about supporting those community-led, grassroots, local initiatives at the same time. So I will just say thank you so much for listening. And if you take away nothing else from this presentation, I hope that you can just we can redesign the economy to serve people and planet, and the law does have an important role to play. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. That was really informative. Um, I think we will move on to some questions. And my first question is for Michael. Michael, can you tell us a bit more about the Global Wellbeing Economy movement and the Economy Alliance? And what are some of the most inspirational examples that you've seen from your experience doing this work?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sean. And that's a fantastic presentation, Melissa. I don't need to say anything about what is a well-being economy. You absolutely nailed it, I think, there with your descriptions and also the visuals, which make it very easy to understand just how we need to situate the economy within society and the planet, not the other way around. But to your point, Sean, a little bit about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, so or WEAL for short. It's one of the leading collaborations of organizations, alliances, movements, and individuals really working to bring economic systems change about. The need for the alliance was really first identified in the 2010s, in particular as a result of the missed opportunity of the financial crisis of 2007-8. At that time, there really wasn't sort of a coherent alternative economic paradigm with the sort of full array of policy prescriptions required to shift the system. And, sadly, in a way, the moment will pass, if you like. I'm not saying that if that coherence was in place, it would have happened, but we'd have had a better shot than we did. Now, the alliance is important to say it's not a network of networks, so it doesn't sit on top of other organizations, as is sometimes imagined, but it's more of an inverted umbrella. So it looks to amplify the work of its members and allies. So it amplifies in a way that shows the parallels between initiatives and shared values that underpin them. So, this kind of demonstrates the coherence when presenting it to decision makers, be that government decision makers or business. So a number of the examples that Melissa showed, so donor economics, or for example, community wealth building, circular economy, economic democracy, all of these could be viewed as pathways to a well-being economy. So, and this is important because in recent years in Scotland, where I am, where the government talks a lot about a well-being economy, by situating community wealth building, which has just been passed into law in Scotland, which is the first in the world, as a key vehicle through which to achieve a wellbeing economy, it really kind of helped to push that bill successfully through the Parliament because they could see that it was a part of the journey in arriving at a wellbeing economy. Now, we set up the Alliance 8 years ago now, next month, in fact. And it really now consists of nearly 600 organizational members globally, 2,000 plus citizens, 88 ambassadors, spokespeople, over 100 policymakers, and 6 governments. And that government's partnership is called the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership. But also, critically, 24 hubs around the world. And these hubs do what the original WEAL Global team does, which is work to create new narratives about the purpose of the economy, synthesize the knowledge, and bring that knowledge with the cover of those new stories out in the general public to power bases, new groupings of individuals and organizations who look to then promote and enact a well-being economy, which is context specific and so therefore will look different. As Melissa said, it's a plural thing. It will look different in different parts of the world. And so while the alliance began really in the global north, it's now really starting to look more global with hubs in Brazil, Costa Rica, Singapore, India, parts of Africa, as well as where it originally began in Europe and then North America and Australia, New Zealand. Now, I don't want to take up too much time, but you did ask me also, Sean, some of the sort of most inspiring examples, and I had to think because there is a lot of good work going on out there. It can seem terribly depressing at this moment in time with what's going on in the world, but there is good work being forged. And I'm just going to pick out just maybe two or three. Let's see how the time goes. Um, and these featured as part of a project called Global Wellbeing Economies that we did last year, which very much had a non-northern but a majority world look to them. Not exclusively so, but one that genuinely was more representative. And the first of those three is the concept of universal basic income. And the reason I highlight that is because it's really gaining attention worldwide. And it's really gone from what some people have dismissed as a utopian idea to a tangible policy being tested in various countries. In fact, as of just last year, there were 200 UBI or Universal Basic Income pilots globally across the global south and the north, demonstrating that UBI is not solely a Western or a Northern idea, but it's being explored across different economic and political contexts. Um, I'm not advocating necessarily for it. I'm not picking it as a preferred approach over, for example, minimum income guarantees, which the Scottish We All Hub is pushing for in its manifesto in the upcoming Scottish elections, or universal basic services. But as I said, we look to promote the multiple pathways that you can achieve. For example, the dignity, one of the five we all needs. And I think that is one good example of that. And just in case anyone is thinking, well, how do you pay for that? And there are questions about how you could pay for that at the national level. I think some of the arguments advanced for paying it through global means are the way forward. So this could be financial transaction tax, or I think very interestingly, potentially a tax on the capital uplift of AI going forward. Given the fact that AI is being touted as a job killer, well, what if the ownership, or at least the value created by that, was actually distributed for society as a whole? So universal basic income is one. Another one, which is perhaps feeling slightly further away, is governance of the global commons. So the concept of the commons, I don't think I need to be teaching anyone this, but I'll just mention it in case anyone doesn't know, refers to resources or systems that are or could be collectively enjoyed, managed, utilized for the benefit of a community or society as a whole. Now, it just doesn't just have to be resources. It could also, global commons can relate to things like trade, tax, the financial system. I think also a very exciting area is potentially around mineral allocation. I know it feels slightly further away than perhaps the universal basic income, where there are so many pilots going on at the moment, but these could be quite game-changing interventions. So, for example, a global trading system premised on the maximization of social equality and environmental sustainability would be a game changer compared to the almost now defunct World Trade Organization approach of reciprocity without any regard for environmental or social standards. Or the monetary system. Way back when, during the Bretton Woods negotiations, post the Second World War, the Bancor, an international financial mechanism acting as a clearinghouse for surpluses and deficits, was proposed by the British economist Keynes. It wasn't taken up, and now we have this dollar hegemony, if you like, which creates all kinds of inequalities. So it's not just resources, it's systems. And although it might feel further away, coalitions of the willing moving together in certain trading spaces or potential currency exchange realms, there is a way to start exploring, sort of looking at the greater good, if you like, for some of these systems. And then I'll just very, very briefly mention the third one, which is future generations. Melissa touched upon it, but I think it's probably sits between the two, UBI and global commons, in that, the UN in 2024 made a declaration, the Future Generations Declaration. The Welsh legislation mentioned by Melissa in the Balearic Islands of Spain, they've instituted legislation. I know New Zealand is pushing for legislation, and many countries around the world, Kenya and others, are pushing for this. And I think it's really important because it's not just instigating legislation, but it's getting institutions to work differently, getting them to work across silos and getting them to work with a longer term vision, which is so antithetical to the way that short-term decision making is made so often these days. So that's why I think that for me is really encouraging. So those would be the three. But on the website, our website, there are many inspiring case studies from around the world as well. But I'll leave it at that for now, Sean.
Thanks, Michael. That was great. Just to bring Kevin into the conversation, we've heard from Michael about this movement on a global scale. But can you tell us about your work with We All Canada and why grassroots community-led efforts are important and necessary? Now, what can people do themselves to push for this bold systemic reform?
Thanks so much, Sean. And also thanks, Melissa and Michael, for those amazing presentations. So, We All Canada is basically we are associated with Michael and We All, and we are trying to network some of the existing amazing projects that are going on in Canada in well-being economies and try to get them networked together. I think there's an amazing quote from Danny Graham, who works with Engage Nova Scotia out east, around getting as many of the actors in this sector together in dialogue as long as possible and creating kind of the soil for change to emerge from that. And I think that's what We All Canada is really focused on, is really getting all of those actors together and in a pluralistic way and with integrity. And specifically, if I was to speak to the grassroots aspect of things, which is kind of the capacity which I'm in here, there's actually a quote that I came across that I really love about describing grassroots by Kayla Weber, a doctoral candidate in the Department of Social Justice Education at the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, University of Toronto, and she specializes in women's and gender studies. And the quote is, grassroots movements approach community support and building from a position of transformative love, modeled after going to a community member's home for a meal after school and hearing a story or receiving advice, or an elder listening to their kin talk about life events they are going through. This approach realizes that support is relational and trust-based, and that building trust is an organic process that takes time and intentional patience. And what I love about that is it brings it into the kitchen table. And the fact that these changes, we can talk policy, and policy is going to be a really important part of things, but all of that activation is going to happen in communities on the ground. If we're going to change the culture of our economic system, that is where the momentum needs to be built as well. And it's grassroots is, primarily it's community based. It's about local actors addressing localized problems and building momentum that can spur change from the local all the way to the national and international levels. It's driven by shared values of participation, equity, solidarity, and a commitment to justice. And really, it's what democracy enables. Democracy just kind of creates this container that allows for citizens, the people within communities, to be able to activate and build the worlds that they want, defining their own goals and how to achieve them. So another quote that I really like is regarding the idea of islands of coherence. And this is kind of, I think, really key in understanding how grassroots can spiral up to be able to create national globalized change. And this is by Ilya Prigone, who I'm probably pronouncing that name horribly. But he has this quote about, when a complex system is far from equilibrium, like we're witnessing our kind of society writ large experience now, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. And I think what that tells us is that shifting the Canadian economic landscape towards well-being can start with these small islands of coherence, which are these kind of grassroots projects of local actors acting on local concerns and building that trust, and that trust being leveraged into larger and larger shifts and changes in a kind of a solidarity, the idea of having the power of solidarity in political decision-making power. And I guess with We All Canada, what we're hoping is that we're going to be able to aggregate and connect and support these grassroots movements together and projects to form a foundation that allows for that fertile soil for well-being economies to emerge across Canada. and to be able to keep them connected. Now, there's a few reasons why I think that grassroots organizing is important, and I'm going to try to highlight a few of these and try to go through a few examples as well. One, I think they're really going to be the frontliners in responding to the poly crisis. And I think that's because that grassroots movements are embedded within their communities. They will be the ones who respond first. When kind of the crap hits the fan, we're going to be turning to each other. We're going to be turning to our neighbors. We're going to be turning to the people closest to us. And those grassroots organizations already have those connections. A great example is at the beginning of COVID, when COVID first kicked in. There's an organization in Guelph where I'm located on Treaty 3 territory, called the Guelph Neighborhood Support Coalition. And it is basically an aggregated organization that supports communities in neighborhoods that have organized themselves to support each other. And the GNSC exists as just a connecting body that allows the autonomy of these communities to be able to meet their needs. And when COVID happened, people didn't turn to institutions in Guelph. They turned to the neighborhood groups. And the neighborhood groups ended up becoming the primary point of contact for most of the communities that had become isolated through COVID. So we can already see that grassroots groups can already play this role in responding to this poly crisis. Another thing that grassroots groups allow is kind of collective organizing power. Now, this may be a bit of a gap right now because we're seeing a gap between the folks who are doing this work on the ground and the ability to kind of coordinate and aggregate them so that folks are learning from each other, what the best practices are, and are coordinated together to allow that kind of power with solidarity energy to be able to create that societal change, to enable the political will for some of these policy changes to happen. And because they're on the ground, they are operating with the people who are most affected and therefore have the most insight into how these changes will be affecting people on the ground to be able to inform how policy can be created. Another thing is that they have the capacity to create the conditions for well-being on the ground. And what I'll do is I'll give an example. There's a few links that I've passed on to Megan. Hopefully, he's going to be able to share them with you. But there's a project happening in Guelph called the Accessible Agriculture Project, led by an accessibility professional named Christopher Little. And the idea is that, having a disability is one of those marginalizations that eventually everybody is going to experience. Every one of us is going to end up disabled at some point in our lifetimes. And what this project shows is that people with disabilities still have immense capacity. And this project, what it does is it's a project to have people with disabilities be able to engage in agriculture, engage in farming, and to demonstrate, create proof of concept that such a thing is not only possible, it's beneficial. Because when we create accessibility for people with disabilities, we're actually enabling everybody to participate in our economy together, right? So, and then I'd say another last aspect is all of these things combined can contribute to the idea of social transformation. And I think that's what we're looking for, is we're looking for ultimately, when we talk about economics, it's really our society we're looking to transform. And there's another great quote I'll say from Stephen Mintz. He's a professor of history at Yale University. In the hands of committed citizens, grassroots movements become engines of social transformation, one neighborhood, one issue, one victory at a time. And I believe that change begins where people gather, where they build from below, one community at a time. Grassroots groups are already immersed in communities. They understand the multifaceted contexts and issues that could deter projects or stall innovative solutions, while creating a sense of trust in community. Because ultimately, we are going to need that sense of trust. I think that is one of the critical points of the poly crisis, is the loss of trust in our institutions, that they will function for our benefit. I think that we're recognizing that it is not the case. And I think that there's enough momentum being built within Canada for us to be able to create some change towards that being a reality. So those are kind of the things that I want to talk about. I'm not sure where my time is at here, but if I have a minute, I might share a poem with you since I am a spoken word artist, and that is really how I'm wired. Um, if y'all allow. So
Go for it, Kevin. Thank you.
I'm gonna share this one, and I'm probably gonna share another one at the end, but I did want to share this one, and it's called The Dance, and it is relevant. There is an elegant coherence to the frolicking motes of dust reveling in the window light. Is it the heart or mind that attunes or perceives its entropic order? What on the surface appears chaotic is yet inherently limited in form. Such is the nature of the threshold between experiences. The new is seemingly a random novelty, yet follows with reliable predictability. There is a limited number of ways to what is as yet unknown, to approach what is as yet unknown with coherence. Like it or not, we are open systems, fractally relevant and related, complex and dissipative. We are dancing motes of dust in window light. We are clustering bunnies scurrying under the sofa for safety, collecting in cobweb kingdoms, sagging in perpetual collapse under the weight of our own plurality. This is to say that we are at once islands of coherence and the archipelago, both pole star and galaxy. We are Schrodinger's anthropomorph, at once both living and dead. We are born into dying to be born. And we forget that we are inherently wired for the unknown. We are constantly emerging from a womb of stars as our first instinct. When pressured into the confinement of what no longer fits, the eggshell of our expectations cracks, revealing a world swirling in the window light. And we are both the motes of dust and the dance itself. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, Kevin, that was amazing. Um, that was really fantastic. Melissa, I'm just gonna dip you back maybe into the conversation. Given your experience, can you tell us about the role that legal and policy reform can play in creating the systemic shifts we need? And maybe talk about the barriers that exist to implementing these reforms.
That's tough to follow, especially when my question is about law and policy, which isn't nearly as maybe inspiring and beautiful as Kevin's poem. But I find it actually can be quite inspiring and beautiful if it's used in the right way. And I think that can segue into the fact that we can think about law as a tool of design. Um, I 100% agree with what Kevin was saying about you need those cultural shifts foundationally. We're not going to see law and policy change at the government level unless we have citizens, communities calling for that change meaningfully, collectively, and really moving that culture shift towards what broader well-being as the priority, pushing against the limited interests of a few, the shareholders, the corporations, the 1%. So I very much feel like that interplay and that polarization between governance, law, policy change, and the grassroots community-led change. I think we need it both because we're not going to shift. The things I'm talking about as the using law as a tool are not going to happen if we don't have communities, a groundswell approach of transformation being demanded essentially, and doing it themselves as well, just taking things and running because we are feeling very much, I think, a lot of us stuck and disappointed in what we're seeing in some of the government approaches of the day. But I would say in a space where we have governments that are doing the good work, I think in Canada, like I mentioned, let's get this new cabinet committee actually doing what its name is, advancing well-being and quality of life. We haven't heard anything back from them when we've written to them. We have heard that they are not connected into the work that the Stats Canada is doing. We've got all these metrics. Let's make them more meaningful. Let's really embed them in the government decision making and budgeting. There should be, like I mentioned about the legislative piece, like mandate that governments have to demonstrate, not just say, oh yeah, this is good for governance, right? If you look in the appendice of the federal budget this year, it said things like the major project office, which is being used to further extraction, ignore Indigenous rights. That is marked as being good for prosperity and good governance, but there's no explanation given, rationale to support that assertion. So let's have to provide evidence. Let's mandate that governments have to show how they're going to achieve these objectives, these metrics, and require them to report and be accountable on how they're they're working towards implementing these objectives and ensure that they put money where the mouth is, right? The budgets and funding should be attached to demonstrating how you're advancing these various well-being objectives. And I think Michael spoke to the need for coherence and collaboration in these approaches, ensuring that all these departments are working together because so much of this is connected. Can't talk about climate change without talking about risk management, about jobs, about health. Like it's all interconnected, right? So I think there's a lot of things that law and policy can do to advance the well-being objectives more meaningfully, rather than it be a cursory thing that's like, oh, look, we've got this quality of life framework. We're measuring, but you can measure things to death until you actually take action and have the measurements implemented and meaningfully affect how we go about our, budgeting, what policies we implement, right? How we support communities in advancing well-being. And I'd also just say the current and Future Generations Act of Wales, having that commissioner is a good example. We need that oversight, that body. I'd say it'd be great if we could go even further, not just provide expert advice and like a kind of a function of collaboration, but also have some teeth to it, where you're able to actually take measures to enforce where governments are not complying with their obligations to advance well-being, and really do that tough work of ensuring that there is accountability and oversight to achieve those objectives, I think is really important. And then finally, I will also say that we can look at these different examples like Wales, but also keep in mind that we are dealing with a space where we have a colonial, history and present day. And so we can't be looking at that as like the model. We need to be accounting for, the pluralism that is needed and how we support Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous rights, Indigenous economies, and issues of redistribution that need to happen, and addressing the harms that have been caused by the current economy as part of this. So I think that's going to be a really important piece, is how do we support Indigenous peoples in this process and meaningfully make space for their jurisdiction and their laws and their knowledge, and also address the foundational racist underpinnings of our society. That's, speaks, I guess, to the cultural shift a bit that Kevin was talking about. Culturally, we need to be embedding different priorities, different practices, and addressing issues of power over towards power with. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Melissa. I think we have time for maybe one, maybe two questions. We'll see how we get on from our audience. We've had some really, really interesting questions, and I know that Michael is trying his best to answer some of them in the chat. We have a question I thought was interesting. That there is a case that there is not enough. It's one thing to have a lower limit on income, but there also needs to be an upper limit as well. And one of our audience members would be interested to hearing our speaker's perspective on that issue and upper limit on income.
I'm happy to jump in first on that one, Sean. I think there's a strong case for it, to be honest. There's a chap from the UK. He's sort of self-styled the people's economist, Gary Stevenson, and he talks a lot about inequality. And he's very effective in the way that he talks about inequality because he comes from a working class background and he made it as a trader in the city of London. But he does make a good point that, so long as, wealth begets wealth, and wealth will continue to buy up assets in the current system, which will make it more and more unaffordable for the basics of life to be to be something that the working class, let alone the middle class, soon can aspire to, and all countries see that. I know that you see that in Canada in terms of your housing unaffordability. We have that here in the UK as well. So Thomas Piketty as well in his incredible book Capital in the 21st century highlighted there has only been one period in time, the period following the Second World War, where there was a reduction in inequality. And that's where we were seeing income tax rates of around 75, 80, 85, 90% in the global north. Now, whether or not that's feasible politically or not, it is the only time there has been a reduction in inequality, and we must bring inequality down. So I don't think simply creating floors will be sufficient, because as I said, wealth begets wealth. And until we tackle that, we're going to see a continuing divide and the societal pressures created by that.
Yeah, and I would just add that, it's the level of extreme differences between the upper and lower ends is it's insane the amount of, like, when you look at the charts around billionaires and the amount of money that they make compared even to 5 years ago, and that there's no cap anywhere that I know of really effectively addressing. We're not talking about millionaires, we're talking about extreme billionaires. And so I think when I talk about having a governance framework, in my mind, it's not just, we have these objectives and these metrics. That then necessitates different policies like wealth tax, caps on wealth, and pluralistic approach. We're not necessarily advocating for one particular pathway, but I think that is one very, very important thing is how do we redesign and create policies and laws that cap those things, do redistribute the way we do things so that that isn't even possible potentially. So I would just connect that into the need for that legal framework then enables those kinds of changes on the ground. I think I even had one of my circles there in that example of enabling better policies was something like a wealth tax. So I think 100% you need to be thinking about that as well. So important.
If I could chime in very briefly, I think that I agree with both of my fellow panelists, but I also think we need to be thinking about fundamentally changing the social contract of capital. Because I think that what that does is that it imprisons us within this idea that labor and land belong to a capital class, right? And that basic framework is an issue, right? I think everything else becomes a band-aid. I think we actually need to reinvent the way that we operate from the ground up as stewards of a commons. And I think that approach to things is going to be really fundamentally important because I think we are facing collapse, and collapse, while is scary, it is already happening around the world, and it is also an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves. I'll leave it there.
Thanks all for your response. Another question is to how do we get Prime Minister Carney or any government from any other developed economy to understand all of this and make the correct decisions moving forward?
I don't think I'm going to volunteer here.
I,
I'm not,
I
it's not
I
my
will
priority.
volunteer. I will volunteer, and I will warn you that my vision of this is rather radical. I don't think we can. I don't think we can. I think that Prime Minister Carney is very much geopolitically captured, cognitively, and I think that what has to happen is it needs to be the political will needs to come from the people. We have to create the conditions whereby there is no other choice but to shift the way that we operate. And I think that comes through the coordination of invested groups of people who are like we all Canada, like all the numerous groups across Canada. We need to be able to create the political will to be able to make them do that because they will not on their own. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and I do agree with you, Kevin. I think that's a struggle that, we have as an organization who, we've done law reform for many years and we work with other organizations, communities around being strategic and advancing law reform priorities that will hopefully see the light of day and be strong. And it is a challenging space right now where we see a need for something like this. We need a well-being of current and future generations legislation very badly as part of the solutions. And it does seem like it would be very challenging given what Carney is doing. He's creating, I don't understand how you on one hand create a cabinet committee on well-being and quality of life, and on the other hand, you have, Bill C5 and One Strong Economy Act, and you're pushing through extraction, militarization. It doesn't make sense. And so it is a struggle to think about how a Carney government that's putting forward the deregulatory, defunding agenda. There's just so many things socially and ecologically that of concern could somehow in this term be swayed. I think the power is in local action. There are municipalities that are moving things like this forward, working in your communities, building the power within, and the culture shift from below, and demanding that moving forward is going to be something that needs to be front and center. And that's part of why I love the work at Ecojustice is because we can do the work to think about the laws and policies that are needed, but we also work collectively with others and campaign and a communications team to educate and raise awareness, things like this, so that people do feel mobilized. They do feel like now I can see solutions. It's not just about how bad things are. It's like there are solutions and we are part of the solution and mobilize people to act. And that's my hope is that that leads to that broader change because we're not going to get it without the people demanding it and modeling it in their
If I could
communities.
piggyback on what Melissa's saying, I think that that's what We All Can offers is kind of to weave together those policy, the things that Ecojustice is doing, those policy pieces with the political will of the grassroots, so that there is some infrastructure in between those two things, linking them and allowing them to work together towards that change.
Sorry, and just to add, I'll plug in there too, because I am a steward of the We All Canada. We have a policy group and we also have a grassroots group. So we are thinking about both of those pieces at the same time, and we welcome folks to join those conversations.
I'm going to chime in, even though I said I wasn't going to, because as an observer from the outside, it does look strange. He was formerly our Bank of England governor. He was also the instigator of GFAN, so the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. But one thing that strikes me is that I believe was a voluntary alliance. And, there is a belief within the neoliberal mindset that volunteerism is sufficient to move us over the line. One of the questions I answered in the chat earlier on was around degrowth and is it commensurate with a well-being economy? Well, that requires an actual reduction in energy and material throughput to bring us back within planetary limits. You can't do that in a voluntary way. I've seen no evidence that you can do that in a voluntary way. So if someone is perhaps, of the mindset of, volunteerism, then I think you might struggle. They might struggle to pull the levers which are necessary, to be honest.
Okay, that is some fantastic and really thought-provoking responses. And I wish I could keep this webinar going for longer because I think there are some fantastic questions coming in the chat and some really engaging, and this is a really engaging conversation. But unfortunately, we are coming up to the hour. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists today and thank you for your thoughtful and informed responses to questions. We'll be sharing this recording with our audience and providing them any of the links mentioned. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you that Ecojustice is 100% donor funded. All of our work is made possible because of the generosity of our supporters. And thank you to any donors who are in attendance. Please sign up for our newsletter to keep informed about future events and work Ecojustice is doing to push for systemic reform and more. Now, without further ado, I will pass it over to Kevin, who's going to close the session with a poem.
Thanks so much, Sean, and thanks everybody for coming. And if you need, please reach out to We All Canada as well. We love to have you join us. This poem is called Liminal, about in between spaces. Hope is not action, and a dream is not a plan. But without them, our path becomes directionless, mechanical, and lifeless. So I've been planning my dreams and taking action on my hopes, and the direction becomes inward. You see, my first job is becoming the person capable of realizing any of it. And there is only one way. You see, it's the striving that changes us, that chips away at the ephemeral and illusory and reveals the spirit living in the stone. Because hope and dream are the voice of that spirit, crying from within to be born in you. It is epigenetic in depth and scope, galactic in relevance, rising from the soft hum of your microscopic building blocks, at work on an entirely different scale. The feedback loops extend from cosmic to quantum, layered and nested in each other, the way we are layered and nested in each other, nested in each other's hopes and layered in each other's dreams. So when we plan together, when we take action together, when our voices rise together, it comes from inside all of us and through us to the quantum and the cosmic. So no, hope is not action, but it is the source. And no, a dream is not a plan, but it is the inspiration. And neither is illusory or ephemeral. They are simply infinite, just like the spirit that makes our voices rise. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Kevin. That was absolutely beautiful. And thank you to everyone for coming, and we hope to see you all very, very soon.
Thanks all.